Hi, I'm Ollie Mitchell, and this QLab tutorial is going to focus on using fade cues with audio cues. Fade cues are arguably the most useful cue in QLab. Let's say we have a music track, and at a certain time of our choosing we want it to fade down. The traditional way would be to play it from a CD player, and then turn down the fader manually on the sound console at the right time, stopping the CD when it's completely faded out. However, the beauty of QLab is being able to set the levels of every sound cue in advance, so we don't really want to be adjusting the fader at all. So instead we use a fade cue. So let's put our music track in. And now we'll put a fade cue in. As you can see, we have a red cross indicating a broken cue, so let's hover over it and see what it says. So this says no target cue. This means we haven't told it which cue we want this fade to act on. So to tell it that we want to fade the music track, we simply click on the audio cue and drag it over the top of the fade cue. Now you can see it's automatically named the cue to show that it's affecting that cue. Also, as the cue has a number, this number has appeared in the target column of the fade. However, we still have a red cross indicating that something still isn't right. It says no fade parameters have been enabled. Pick at least one thing to fade. Basically, it's saying that we haven't told it what we want to fade, whether we're fading up or down, whether it's going completely off or just getting quieter, and lots of other possibilities. So let's go to the fade cue and into the levels tab. And now we'll tell it that we want it to fade down the master volume. So if we click on the master volume fader, you'll see it goes yellow. This means that we're now going to be fading that aspect of the cue. So now let's try playing the cue list. We press go on the music, and it starts playing. Now let's execute the fade cue, and it fades out. You can see though that in the active cue list the music is still playing, it's just got no volume. This might not be an issue as you can't hear it, but when you start getting complicated shows with lots of cues, it can be hard work for your processor to keep up with lots of cues all playing at once, especially if there's no need for them to be playing. So let's stop that cue. To fix this, go back into the fade cue, and on the levels tab, click the box that says stop target when done. Now if we try again, let's play our audio cue, and then we'll fade out. You'll see it fades, and as soon as the fade is finished, the cue ends itself and is no longer in the active cue list. Fading cues can also work on groups containing a large number of cues. So for example, if we had a group with lots of music in it to play while the audience are entering, you can apply fades to that too. Let me just make that group. I'll name the group, and now close it, just so that it takes up less space. So let's say we want the music to fade down, but not out, for an announcement to be made. So get a fade cue, and now we'll drag the group onto that fade cue, and now you'll see in the levels tab, this box has changed from absolute fade to relative fade. Relative fade means that you're fading the cue relative to where it is at the moment. For example, you could bring it down by 10 decibels or raise it by 10 decibels. Absolute fade gives it an absolute value to fade to, so no matter what volume the track is on, it will always fade to that same value. As we're fading a group, each track may have its own level, so though we could do an absolute fade, it makes more sense to do a relative fade to bring down all of the tracks in line with each other. So if we grab the fader, let's say we want to lower it by about 15 decibels. Now let's add another fade cue to fade it back up. So drag the fade cue in, put the group onto the fade cue, and then we'll set the level to be about plus 15, meaning that it will raise back up again to the level it was on. Finally, let's say that when the show is ready to start, we want to fade out the music completely. So add one extra fade cue, assign the group to that fade cue, and tell it to fade out to nothing. Though this is a relative fade, fading to minus infinity will still create a complete fade out. So now let's play the music group. Now, it doesn't matter whereabouts within this group that we are, the fades will still work. So now we're in track 2, let's fade down the music. As you can hear, the level has just got lower, ready for our announcement. The tracks will still continue to play through as they originally would have done, they will just play quieter. When the announcement's over, press the fade again, and we will fade back up. Finally, when the audience are ready to enter, we can fade out the music completely. As you can see, we forgot the Stop Target When Done button for the last cue. So if I go to this last fade cue and press Stop Target When Done, this will ensure that all of the tracks stop playing when we fade out the music. If you go into the Curve Shape tab for a fade, you can change a few other settings. Firstly, you can change the length of time that the fade takes. The fade out was perhaps a bit quick for the start of a show, so let's change this to 8 seconds. You can also play with the fade curve. This shows how the audio fades over time. The default is an S-curve, which is usually pretty good, but if you want to change it, you can play around with different options. If you change this box to Custom Curve, you can then grab the curve and adjust it as you wish. I'll set mine back to an S-curve for now. So that was fading tracks down, but what if you want to fade a track up instead of starting it abruptly? Let's get a new music track. And we'll just play it to see what it sounds like. You can hear that song starts straight away. We want it to fade in instead of starting so suddenly. So first, let's get a fade cue and put it after our cue. Now we'll tell it that we want to fade this music track. Now, as we want it to fade up, the volume of the track needs to be off to start with. So go into the audio track, go to the device and levels, and turn it down so that the volume is off. Now go into the fade cue and tell it to fade up. You can either do this just by dragging, or you can set the level to an exact number using this. 0 means full volume. Anything above that will be louder than its actual volume, and anything below will be quieter. Now if we go back to the music track and press play, you'll see that it started playing, but there's no volume coming out. If we then push play on the fade cue, the music will gradually fade in. More often than not, you'll want the track to fade up straight away when you start the music. So to do this, we'll simply add an auto continue with a time of 0 seconds. So click on this box, the auto continue has been added, and now if we push play, you'll see the track starts fading up instantly. So now we've used fades to fade cues up and down, but we can also use them to pan a cue. So let's say you wanted to create the effect of a helicopter flying from one side of the stage to the other. First, let's drag our sound effect in. Let's just have a quick listen. At the moment it comes from left and right, so let's change it so that it only comes out of the left channel. So we'll fade the right channel out completely. Now if we play it again, you'll see it only comes from left. Now we need a fade cue to fade it across to the right channel. So drag in a fade cue, tell it that we're fading the helicopter, and here we're going to turn the left channel off completely and the right channel up to 0. We'll type in the value just to be completely accurate. Next, let's change the length of the cue to 10 seconds so it's gradual. Do this by going into curve shape and then changing the duration to 10 seconds. Now let's add an auto continue to the sound effect so that the fade starts straight away. Now if we play it, it should fade from left to right. Now that was pretty good, but it's not very realistic because though it's panning, the volume stays the same the whole time. Let's fix that. We'll need one cue to fade it up, one cue to pan it, and another cue to fade it down. So let's drag 2 more fade cues in. One before the pan, and one after. We'll assign them both to the helicopter track. And then we need to make the helicopter track have 0 volume at the start. Let's turn down the master fader rather than left or right. Then the first cue in levels needs to be set to full volume. This will fade up the sound effect. And then the last cue needs to be completely off so that it fades the track away again. Let's set the fade time for the fade up and fade down cues to 3 seconds each. Now when we start the music track, we want it to start fading up and panning straight away. So we'll set both of these to auto continue after 0 seconds. As you can see, the fade up will start straight away, as will the pan. As it takes 10 seconds to pan, then by the time it's finished panning, we want it to have faded out again. So as the pan lasts 10 seconds, and we have a 3-second fade out, we want to start the fade out after 7 seconds. So put an auto continue of 7 seconds on this cue. Finally, on the fade out, let's just make sure we've ticked the stop target when done button, so that the helicopter sound effect will stop. Now if we go back to the top and play, hopefully it will sound right. Great, that achieved exactly what we were hoping. That brings us to the end of this QLab tutorial on fading audio. Have a go yourself and then come back and watch the next tutorial. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.